this thing's going. Well, I was working in shipyards for. I was working in the Ford dealer in the body shop when we were married, Bakersfield. I went to night school. I wasn't happy there, so I went to night school and learned arc welding. I went down to the shipyards and down and worked the week, then come home on the weekend, keep working. We bought a home there, and then when the war broke out, why, he came down Long Beach, and I worked up in the shipyards, worked up as a lead man and a welder, and then I transferred to, when they started cutting back a little bit, the shipyards, I transferred to maintenance, and worked there for almost 2 years, and Olah's brother was killed on the farm up at Shelley. We came up to the funeral, and they were so desperate for help up there at the farm. I told Olah, I'm just going to stay. So I transferred my papers up to the draft board up at Shelley. Now, we were there on the farm for 9 years. And then I left the farm. I worked in the auto body shop in Idaho Falls and tried selling for a while, and then we came down here in November of '55, and we built the house here in '56, and been here ever since. I taught for 6 years, then was an assistant dean for 3 years, and then became dean for 12 years. Well, it's been a good life.
I vaguely remember something about you doing something in the typing pool during the war.
I won a scholarship for typing. But the scholarship wasn't enough money. It was supposed to be in Spokane, and you couldn't afford to go to Spokane. I couldn't afford to go to there, so.
Then you went to Denver.
Huh?
And you went to Denver.
Yeah, and I went to Denver and went to a business school. The Park School of Business, and it's still in existence in Denver.
We met here at ISU. This is when I got out of college. That's when my
after
education
you come here, I took. This was just a 2-year college here, and I went for 2 years, no more college, and I couldn't go to outside of here, so I just had 2 years. I had that business school and then 2 years of college. Then I worked for a firm of attorneys for 15 years.
How did your parents feel about you going to college?
Fine. Yeah, they did. Yeah, after you got out of high school, at that time, that's all the education a girl was supposed to have. It was just out of high school. But I was determined I was going to get out of St. Anthony. It was so LDS. It was just all LDS. There's only about 4 or 5 of us that were Protestant. So, and Mother had an aunt that lived in Denver, and that's how I happened to get to go there. She said, I'll board and room her, and if you want to send her. So I was acquainted with a girl whose dad was running J.C. Penney in St. Anthony, and the woman wanted to go back to see her mother. Her mother lived in Denver, so I caught a ride with them back to Denver to go to this aunt's place, and then from there I went to the school.
Park School?
Yeah. Park School of Business. It was run by 2 brothers. And it's amazing that there was another school in existence, but it was too far away. I only had 4 blocks to walk to get to this from from the apartment where Aunt lived to the school. So I was there all that winter and part of the summer. Come back to St. Anthony and there was no jobs. It was a depression there. You couldn't find a thing.
My dad lost his farm in 1933 from the depression and the drought. And they moved over from Austin to Irrigan. And I stayed with my uncle in Enterprise and finished high school, senior year. And then went over and worked in the harvest at Pendleton for that's fall, and then came to Pocatello, hitchhiked in Pocatello to go to college with $30 in my pocket. And my aunt, mom's sister lived here, and room and board. So took auto mechanics. And I worked at that a year and came back and took auto body repair, and that's where I met my bride.
Wait a minute, you met your bride in auto body repair?
College.
In college.
Where exactly?
Yeah.
Did you meet at a dance, or did you just happen to run
Yeah,
into each other?
we met Saturday night at college dance. Prettiest thing on the floor.
Yeah, at that time, we used to dance over to a building over across town. And nobody had any cars. We walked over. We go to the dances.
Well, that was the formal dances.
Yeah, the formal dances. We always had
the girls walked across town with their holding their formal dresses up on. Nobody had transportation.
Yeah.
How long did you date before you married?
More than 2 years, wasn't it?
Yeah. Our first date was climbing Mount Timport over here. I had to check her out, see if she was physical fit. And you hadn't climbed Timport, you weren't anything in college.
Yeah.
Well, the story of how we started dating, why, I tried to date her, and she said, no, I'm going steady with so-and-so. And I said, I couldn't seem to break the chain. And one night, dancing with her, and the corners of her mouth down, I said, what's the matter? Well, my boyfriend's been drinking. I don't want him to take me home. I said, don't go home with that drunken bastard. Let me take you home. That started the chain.
Yeah.
And I was working in Bakersfield, California, and I came up and we got married and went back down, and we lived 2 to 3 different places and then bought a house. And I thought that's where we were going to stay, but war come along and stirred us up.
Yeah.
Where was Dad born?
Was what?
Where was Dad born?
In Long Beach.
In Long Beach.
Loretta was born up when we were living at the ranch in Shelley.
Yeah, he was a war baby. He was born during the war.
Well, so was I.
Yeah. The previous war, the first war.
Now, say the war babies, as my friends always says, what, was that the Civil War?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good life. We retired. We did quite a bit of traveling. Went to China for 22 days on a trailer caravan to Panama. Was gone 74 days below the border, and 6 weeks in Europe.
Sure.
So we got to see a little of the country. put a lot of miles on our trailer.
What's something that you remember about Dad when he was growing up?
We always laugh about on the ranch up there. He had a tricycle, and we put a trailer hitch on it. We had a wagon, and he would pull Retta in the wagon. Driving his tricycle, he always had to have his mittens on because the men drove the tractors. They had gloves, so he had to have his mittens on.
Had to have his mittens.
And there was an old thrashing machine down in the field, and found a nest of kittens in there. Well, he grabbed one of those kittens, and what did he call her?
Baby.
Baby. And she was his favorite cat. Then we left the farm. We lived over about a mile from the Harder farm, and for most of the summer. And they had a bunch of cats there, and Roger and the landlord's boy, they go down the road a couple hundred yards, and there was a creek came into the Snake River, and they'd fish. Catch these little trout and feed them to the fish. Or to the cats. They'd have about 8 or 10 cats following them down there to the fish hole. And then we moved up to Idaho Falls, and kids were in the 4th and 5th grade when we came down. The third, 4th, and 5th, weren't they?
Yeah.
When we came down here, Roger was in scouting up at worked as the scout master. I was assistant scout master, and we worked as scouts. And I came down here, well, I did the same thing, and Roger didn't get his eagle. He went up to Star, which is next to Eagle, and I should have insisted he finish, but I didn't. He regrets the day that he didn't go out and get his eagle. Then he went in through the ROTC here into the military.
I used to take him from Shelley up to Idaho Falls to the Presbyterian Church, and the lady up there was giving out prizes for the children that have been there.
Pins.
Yeah, you go ahead and tell it. You can tell it better than I can.
At the end of the school year, the Sunday school year, they have pins for attendance. And the kids were lined up, and Roger walked out at the head of the line. He says, "I've been going to this church all my life. I've never got a pin." "You got a pin?"
Yeah.
Oh, he was a good scout. He did a great job of teaching. One assignment he had was how to sharpen an axe, and he did a real good job on that. And I realized he had the ability to extend information. And he was very good in the military. He was a very good teacher.
Did it surprise you that he went into the military, or did you?
Well, no, he liked it very much. He was very proud to be a student, a cadet. And when he was at the end of his junior year, they required that they go to Fort Lewis to the summer for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. He came home and he says, "Dad, that's for me." And that launched him into his military career. He had quite a responsibility in his assignment in Germany. His assignment was, that's when he got his major stripes, and he was in charge of military education, PR, and new construction. So he had quite a, and some of the episodes he had in that construction or something. That was a good experience going over there, and we stayed with them and took trips we went to Holland and Switzerland and London, and Paris.
Yep.
I might, for interest, I might relate some of my dad's episodes. Blaine's been trying to get me to do this very thing for some time on some of my dad's stories. Dad was on his own from the time he was 12 years old. He had folks died, and he was next to the youngest, and went down in California and worked with
Long reach.
his brother-in-law, and logging and then they came back and worked as a wrangler for a fellow that raised horses over in Olah County. Twice he and two other fellows accompanied 5 carloads of horses down to Stockton. They were just opening that for farming in those days. And those horses were just halter broke when they put them on the train. And they unloaded them and fed them, watered them 5 times en route. And he said, time we got down there, those horses, you could lay your hand on them, you could do anything with them. But the guy was quite a businessman. The land down there had some sort of swells in it. And this guy took big logs and made a big drag and put a steel blade on the front. And he put 20 horses on it and leveled the ground, got the horses broke, and sold them the horses. The farmers the horses. And Dad did that twice. And some of the episodes he told about, he said, he came in from the wrangling one time, and everybody was in bed, and this one guy came in real late, and the cook was in bed, wouldn't get up, find anything to eat, and somebody said, well, there's a deer hanging out there in the tree, cut us off fry you some meat. He did, and he says, the guy says, that's the most terrible meat I ever ate. Next morning he found out it was a coyote carcass. He's telling about one time he got on this half-broke bronc and went out for the day, and he said he got out about 10 miles and he had to get off to relieve himself, and the horse jerked loose from him and run off. He says, did you ever walk 10 miles in cowboy boots? Another time there was this fellow selecting the horses and getting them in ready for market. And this bay mare, I guess, had escaped 2 or 3 times, and they wanted to get her out of there. She was a prime animal. And when the cowboys the wranglers had to buy their own lariat, their own rope. Well, they were getting $1 a day in room and board, and it took most of a week's wages to buy a lariat. Well, they went out, this animal came by, this mare, and he roped her. The rope went clear down around her shoulders and right straight away from him. Well, he tied the rope to the saddle so he wouldn't lose the rope. And this mare took off, and there's no way he could, the bronc he was riding couldn't outrun her. And straight away, with the rope down around her shoulders, he dragged him to pieces. So he tried to untie the rope, and he couldn't, so he spurred this cayuse to keep up, and he finally got his knife out and cut the rope. He never tied the rope to the saddle after that. But That guy had, one time had about 600 head of horses. And he marketed them all over the West. But this, one time when Dad had to go to Enterprise, with farm up to the Enterprise to the county seat for some business, and I got to go with him in the old Model T Ford. And in the courthouse, he met this guy, Dave Tucker. He introduced me to him, and they talked for a while, and on our way home, I said, well, where did you know Mr. Tucker? Well, he says, I worked with him as a wrangler on the horse ranch. And then he told me this story about Dave helped rob a bank in Joseph. These two guys came in and worked as wranglers, and they got Dave Tucker and one other guy, talked him into helping rob the bank in Joseph. Well, then what these young fellows guys was to keep the crowd back. Well, there was Fitzhugh and Smith were the guys that set this up. And Smith went into the bank, got the money, and came out, and kind of according across the block, Wagner ran a blacksmith shop. And that week, he'd taken his rifle down to the shop to do something to it, because the next weekend was hunting season started. When he saw what was going on, he got his 30 out, shot a few rounds, and killed Smith out on the steps of the bank. Well, Fitzhugh, you know how gutsy the guy was. He got off his horse, went up, and rolled Smith's body out of the way, picked up the money, and all those bullets flying around, he was shooting at Wagner, trying to keep him down with his rifle. And he couldn't get on the horse, pull his bag, so he took the lariat down, tied on the bags of money, got on the horse and pulled him up, and still shooting at Wagner, and rode out of town. Well, Tucker and his buddy, when they saw him leave, they got their run to get on their horses. And this one guy had a shotgun. He shot the tips off 3 of his fingers. He says, Dave, I know who you are. Next time it'll be right between the shoulders. And he stopped. And he got the other guy too. They put 7 years in penitentiary. He was Dave Tucker was engaged to be married. And when he got out, why, she wanted to get married. He says, no, I got to clear my name first. And he did. He finally bought the home ranch, the Tucker Ranch, and went, and 20 years later was president of the same bank that he helped rob. So it's quite a story. Those episodes of Dad when he was driving freight team from Elgin into the valley. They always stopped about halfway and grained and watered the horses, the team. 8 head of horses. And it was in the fall, it was cold, and there was a 55-gallon keg of whiskey. And he says, the way we drivers always kept our demijohns, you know what a demijohn is, full of whiskey. They take and drive up the second hoop on this barrel and drive a horseshoe nail in and pull it out for air. And the next one they go down and drive a horseshoe nail in and put a little spigot in there. And that would let the whiskey run out to fill the demijohn. When they got through, they just take a match in the hole and bend it and break it off and drive the hoop back down. And he was in the process of filling his demijohn, and somebody said, hello, Elmer. He said he put his thumb over the spigot. And it was the sheriff. And he knew him, and he talked. The sheriff said, well, Elmer said, the people in the stores are complaining that somebody's tapping the whiskey barrels. Elmer said, well, that's terrible. And they talked for a while, and Elmer said, Dad said, the guy talked for a half hour, and he said, about froze his thumb over that whiskey spigot. He didn't get caught. Another time, when they were putting the railroad in, it was just almost, in places, a vertical cliff. Where they had to blast the rock out for the railroad. And they had brought in Chinese to do that rock work. And they set up a camp across the river from the road. And they set some freight outfit had brought their stuff in and put it alongside the road. And the Chinese had built a little footbridge across the river. And it was Dad driving the freight team through there. His buddy said, hey, look at those Chinese left that stove there. He says, I bet you can't run over it. Gee, those horses over in that one front wheel ran right through the middle of that cast iron stove. He says, those Chinamen come running across the bridge, a hooping and a hollering. Another episode when he was a helper on a freight team that took groceries into Lewiston. And they stopped about a 2-hour trip out of a 2-hour travel from Lewiston. And night overtook them, and they stopped, and they had 5 cases, double cases of eggs to go to a Chinese restaurant. I got some of those eggs to cook for dinner, and the vibration of the wagon had separated the yolk, which was common. And the guy said, boy, those Chinamen will never accept them because they rattle, and if you shake them, they rattle if the yolk was broke. So they stayed over another day, took all of those eggs, and boiled them and put them back in the cake.
Oh, man.
So they went in town the next day and delivered all the groceries, and just before they left town, they delivered the eggs to the Chinaman. And they took off. He said, I just often wondered what happened when those guys got into those eggs. Speaking of the Chinese, we went up the Snake River from Lewiston on a jet boat trip one time up to the mouth of the Salmon River, and down in there close to the mouth of the Salmon River, the Chinese had quite a encampment there. They were working the flower gold in the sands of the Snake River. And the Snake River and salmon where they converge. And Dad said he was out on when he was wrangling. He saw these guys up on this horizon. There's 7 or 8 of them, horseback, just at daybreak. He said when they saw him, they went down over the hill and went in town a different route. And a couple of days later, the word got out, they were fishing dead Chinamen out of the Snake River down in Lewiston. These guys had gone in and killed those Chinamen, and they never did know how they got any money out, any gold dust out of it. But that was the end of the Chinamen working for gold in the canyon. And that was a lot of those places where they had rip-rapped and quite a lot of work gone into their camp there. But they never did find out who did it. He said he wasn't close enough to identify any of those people, and just Chinaman, you know, in those days. When he was logging in California with his Uncle Lee, and Bruce's husband. They, Uncle Lee, kind of an adventurous guy, and he took on a contract to move a steam donkey engine up on the ridge where they could snake the logs out of the canyons, big white pine. So they laid that donkey down on the skids and put 12 horses in front and 12 horses behind and took that thing right up the mountain. And a driver on each team took it right up the mountain. And they shot the logs down on a chute down off of that mountain. And the way they did that, they take logs and lay them in like that, and stake on either side so they wouldn't move. Then lay the logs on there, and gravity take them down. And to keep them from going too fast, they'd put them on grade so that they wouldn't shatter when they hit the bottom.
Rough old days living back then, though.
And the old road coming out of Elgin down into Olah River, it was so steep that a lot of the early people would cut trees down and use them drag as a brake going down those that grade. And there was when I was a kid, there was still a pile of logs there where they had cast these logs off and they got down to the bottom. Is there any other question? That's about all of my tales I can think of at the moment.
I don't have any right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'll think of some more later, I'm sure.
Could you furnish a copy of that to Blaine, please? He's been wanting me to do this for some time.
I figure I'll go in and separate them by tail.
Yeah.
And then just
Yeah.
email them all to him. We went to Great Grandma Iva's house when Margaret and I were arguing about the donuts.
Yeah, Grandma Rucker.
Oh, it was Grandma Rucker. Okay.
So you start building this house?
Well, I came down here, we tried to find a place to buy, and we couldn't find anything within our realm of financial ability. And or it was out so far, we didn't want to, knew it wouldn't be possible to get the kids involved in the social life in town, so we had a chance to buy this 5.5 acres and made a deal on it. And the deal was the basement hole out the 10th day of June, and I hired a college kid to help me, and we moved in 17th of November.
Wow.
I worked, I'd go and dig him out at 6 o'clock in the morning, my helper, and he'd go home at 6, and I'd work till midnight.
Oh.
He was building the house, I was building the home. But we moved in here, we only had we slept in the living room here. We couldn't pay rent and payments both, so we moved in. We slept in the living room here. We got the floors laid in the bedroom. They're hardwood floors, and then we got the only door we had on was the bathroom door, and then we laid the hardwood floor in here. It was hardwood up to the fireplace there, and then it was about 4 years before we got the garage put on.
Longer than that until we got fixed up in the basement too.
Yeah, quite a while before we got the basement finished. But it was a place to live. The guy next door built at the same time, and he had a carpenter building his, and I got trouble. I'd go over and get him to come over and help me out. And we saw our friends lived out north of town that had built a house just like this. We borrowed their plans and had to turn the plans over and figure a basement. They didn't have a basement, and so when we saw that house, I told Olah, I said, I think we can build one like that. So we did. Been a good place to live. Then I retired. I put in another ceiling. I dropped the ceiling 6 inches at the wall. We had an open beam here, and put the 2x4s onto the beam, and sheetrocked over and covered it up. An average of about 7 inches of foam.
Oh, wow.
Made a big difference.
Yeah, I bet.
Then we built that solarium on. That worked pretty good for a few years. And the trees grew up, and in the winter it had too much shade. And I changed glass in there and put those are storefronts. And they're safety glass. There's a lot of iron in that. You don't get the penetration of the rays. So it hasn't been too effective. It's a good windbreak.
I want to hear about the wine.
Oh. Well, it seems like I kind of do things in 10-year increments. We had an orchard out here, and some of the fruit I did not do this, so I said, I'm going to make some wine. So I read up on how to make wine. And I bought some carboys, and 30 pounds of fruit and 12 pounds of sugar makes 5 gallons of wine. So I made wine for about 10 years. I made rhubarb wine, and apricot wine, and cherry wine, and plum wine. And it was fun. Gave it away. And one time when Rod here, Margaret and Robin was up here, and I was making wine, and I had to crush the fruit. And these plums, I had a big container full of them, so I got the kids, she and Margaret stripped off their shoes and their socks and got in there, and they were tromping wine, and tromping plums. And when they were purple, it turned to their knees. Oh. Marilyn was backed up to kill me. I used champagne bottles with those plastic corks. Made a perfect seal, and it kept pretty well. I did that for 10 years, and then I got into clowned for about 10 years, and I've been carving for about 10 years. So that's the kind of way I used up my spare time. Then the welding, the junk art, just the welding, did that for a few years before I got into carving. It's been a fun life. Well, I had a good experience up to college. I had started out as teaching auto body repair. I taught for 6 years, and then went into administration. I was assistant dean for 3 years, and then got the big job and was dean for 12 years. I saw the school go from a faculty of 20 to a faculty of 100 in the 12 years. From 200 students to 1,000. And we did a lot of different things. I set up an intern system at the last semester of their school. They could go to work on the job and get credit for school with paperwork as to what they were doing and the supervision that they were receiving, and it worked out quite well. We had students in Wyoming, Arizona, California. Then we set up a system that took a little doing. We were always pressured for political statistics to look good with the legislature, and we were keeping students in some of the technical programs that we shouldn't have. They weren't capable of the advanced work. But statistically, we kept them, but it started backfiring on us. So we set up, say, electronics. We set up 3 levels. It was a 3-year program, but employability at each exit, each one of the end of those years. The first one was they could work on TVs and stuff like that. In other words, we judged them according to their ability to learn and do. Then the second year, they worked with a little more advanced in the technical world, and then the third year, they worked with the engineers. It worked much better. We had real good luck with the students. We didn't tell them they couldn't go on, but we suggested that they not, because I knew they weren't going to make it. We did this in diesel, we did it in electronics. In diesel we did, there was the farm, tractors, trucks, and construction. Those 3 levels. And then they had to support on that, they had to learn the fuel systems, the hydraulic systems, and the general engine maintenance. And so we kept that worked out very well. Then we added diesel electric trucks. And that's still going good, and the industry sends people back to take that course. Then the welding has really blossomed over the years. We had people, one incident, we had, when they were built the big plant over in Wyoming, a big steam coal-fired generating plant, Fort Bridger. The superintendent over there was a friend of our instructor in welding, and he would call once in a while and say, well, hey, I need a couple of welders, and he always had good luck because we were very careful who we sent over there. And he called one day and he said, I got in some stainless work, and he says, I can't find anybody that can put a root bead in that will stand x-ray. Well, the instructor had one kid who was just finishing it's a 2-year program, just finished his first year. He says, I've got one I think can do the job for you. I sent that kid over there, and that's all he did was root beads for 2 years. It was very intricate work. We had one young woman that went into the welding program. She was a single mother, and she had dexterity, was out of this world, and we got her with a company back east somewhere that were building, I believe it was in the electrical generating business. And she's still with them. Rucker gets a card from her every Christmas, and she's just doing 100. Then when Bruce Siri, the dragline company, came in from Wisconsin, they gambled on, when the price of oil started going up, they gambled on coming in and setting up a plant here to build the drag lines, because they figured they'd open up the big coal fields in Utah. Well, it didn't happen. And they were here, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. They went out here in the gun plant. And it was an ideal place. They had more undercover out here than they had in their whole plant in Wisconsin. We visited their plant back there, and that was, we set up a machine shop for them to train, and I sent one of our instructors back government surplus warehouses to get the equipment, machine equipment, and we shipped stuff in here. I had $30,000 in cartage on equipment, and we hadn't even have a student yet. I already stuck my neck out, but it paid off. And we had a small machine shop where we run them through first, and then those who wanted to go on into the advanced, and with the Bruce here, we run them into the big machines. That was quite an episode. When they went out, while we scaled it back to a smaller operation, but more detailed, because we had more equipment. But it was quite an experience to see the transition in machining when the carbide cutters came in. They would, for example, when they made those big, what they call a tub, or those big machines sat on to rotate, those tracks that those rotated on, those were in 6 pieces. And they were an overhang on them where the rollers would rest against to offset the strain when they were lifting. And it took 100 man-hours to machine each one of those sections. Well, when they came here, that's the way you did it back in Wisconsin. Well, here they installed cutters. These were the old, well, they plowed it all. I think that's the machine, name of the machine. But when they put these rotating cutters in there, they did it in 25 hours. That stuff would come off of there red hot, just like cutting wood. Just unbelievable what and then they put in some advanced welding equipment. They'd run 3 welds at the same time on the same machine. It was inert. They used a powder as their inert material. That was quite an experience to see that stuff develop. Then when the AMI, Integrated Ship Company, here came in, that was a good experience. We had set up a plant, and I had one of my colleagues, I said, okay, go to California and set up a deal with those people and come back with equipment and material to set up a school. And he did. They wanted us to train just for one segment. No? who train for the whole operation, because if they don't know what part that their operation is in the total operation, it won't mean anything. I said, you can move these people around wherever you need them, and they can do a job for you. I had to beat them over the head to get them to realize that that's the way it had to work, but it did. But the plant here, they moved everything from California up here. They have expanded the plant. They're in the process now. It'll be 4 times. Then we saw a great transition in the printing industry from the old press of the pressure printing. We saw that go out into the transfer principle. It was everything was we had quite a time making the transition, because there was still a lot of the shops that the people were going to work in still used the old pressure system. So we had to couldn't teach only the modern. We had to kind of slowly move out of that as the industry changed. And by transfer, we saw, to show you how fast technology changes in that aspect, the word processing in the 12 years in that printing changed 5 times. We couldn't buy the equipment. We had to rent it because it was too it moved too fast. And the same way with the computers. We went up into Washington to look at the computer, and we started getting into that. And these schools had bought, the whole state had bought the same computer. How they got them set up, they were outdated. So we worked with the computer center on campus here rather than set up our own computer system. And that paid off, because we kept more current than we would otherwise been able to.
Well, the morning paper is practically all ads, isn't it?
Yeah, they want you to get out and buy more stuff out
Yeah.
Last minute. Isn't that an interesting book?
Yeah, it is.
Now that's on the ranch where Louis lives.
Now,
Is where that happened.
A couple of these are the same pictures that you have downstairs.
Yeah. One. Just one.
Okay. But it's the same.
It's the same mule team.
Same mule team that your dad was on.
No.
Who was on this?
That was the fellow that owned the ranch where Louis is now.
Okay, gotcha.
This guy that owned that ranch he taught ag in high school for a long time. And he was quite educated and quite an intelligent man. But Louis and Jim have really made an operation out of that.
$1 million operating cost is a huge operation.
It was a good experience in working in maintenance in the shipyards. Worked on anything that had a gas or a diesel engine in it, and the union made the division. And the maintenance was very interesting.
Why do you think they kept you here instead of sending you overseas to do maintenance and things like that during the war?
No, I was tied down on the ranch up there. I was froze on the job.
So they couldn't draft you because you were...
Well, they could have, but I tried to, when the war first broke out, I tried to join the Seabees to go to Hawaiian Islands to build tanks for fuel. And they wouldn't take me because I was an ultra-ready. I went up the second time and talked to the recruiter, and he says, "Rucker, go back to the shipyard and go to work. You're not going to Hawaiian Islands." He said, "With ulcers," he says, "that camp food, you'd be a patient in a week." So I didn't get to go to Hawaiian Islands.
I think Grandma was pretty glad that you didn't.
Yeah.
Dad never talks about when he went in the military, when he first got in the military.
He didn't? He didn't. He never would talk about the Vietnam. He never would talk about that.
Do you know where he was?
Yeah, Hanoi was where he was headquartered, but I never did get him to say what he did. I got a hunch. We always had a hunch that he took some special training in Fort Bragg. Before he went sent him over there, and we always had a hunch that he was sent over there to help corral the black market, because he had to go out to some of those fire stations and had to find his own transportation out there and back, and so he was on the move all the time. But I never did find out just what he did. He's over there 13 months.
Every 2 weeks I made a batch of cookies and sent to him, and he got them in 3 days.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Sent them out of San Francisco, and the Army stuff got first deal for everything, you know. And he had it timed over there, just exactly what day it was and what time those cookies were going to come in.
And his buddies all showed up because they got the word too. He said one day he came back into the tent and ants everywhere. He didn't get the lid tight on one of the cans, and the ants had taken over. He said they came from every direction. We take these are 5-pound coffee cans, and fill it with cookies, and then we fill in all the voids with popcorn so they wouldn't crack up. So they used sort of insulation. And he said he had more company because they got the idea as to when those cookies were supposed to show.
Yeah. No, that's the only thing he wanted. That's the only food that he desired.
Said get everything else at the PX.
Yeah.
That's still the only thing he wants is cookies.
He's still a cookie monster, isn't
he? He's funny.
This job he's got now is quite a challenge to him. I guess he's making it go. He says the thing is hurting them. They have a stock of steel on hand, but the price is going down. And every piece they sell, the margin is less. they're not making any money, they're not losing any, but he says it's just kind of a standoff. Then there's less demand with this slump. I guess that help he got from back to that one division back east of Kansas, they eliminated it, and he got some of the help. He says that's been a big boon for him. But he wanted a challenge, and he got one.
Do you have any idea what my mom was doing when Dad was in Vietnam?
Yeah, she was working at some business in Denver.
Her parents were there in Denver.
For a while, yeah. Well, her dad was a kind of a troubleshooter for this trucking company. And they moved him around to different places. He was here, he was in Denver, and then he was here, and then he was in Chicago. But she worked, I'm not sure just what business she worked for, but it was, she was a secretary for one of the big wigs. Would you like to take a little drive up around to see how the elite live?
Either way, if you want to.
Sure. Let's go.
You want to take our car?
Or is it nap time?
Oh, no, let's go take a drive. They're cold to wake me up.
Flip that light off, will you please? In the tank, reclaim our maintenance in the South Pacific. Take two damaged tanks and make one out of them, or whatever, trucks, and tanks, so forth. I'm getting ahead of my story. Violet was a cosmetician and quite an artist. She did a lot of stained glass work and other artistic work. She had her own kiln and made different things. Very, very talented. And Les was, he was a kind of he could do anything. One of these guys that could, when he went to school up at St. Anthony, he overhauled the heating system and cut out 3 carloads of coal in 1 year. And he did the electrical work. He did his whole general maintenance work in the school up there.
Well, he was in the service too.
Yeah, he was a belly gunner on a 17. 30-some missions out of England. Some of the tales he told of returning of those 17s, unbelievable. Some of them we hadn't heard much about. There's a friend of ours that here was a pilot on the 29s. They got together here one night, and we heard a lot of things we hadn't heard before. They got to comparing tales. And then Bud was an electrician. He was in the service for in the Navy. I'll go back on him a little bit. He was kind of a renegade. Mom spent more time in the principal's office than she did at home when he was in high school. He finally got into a row with the principal and left and talked Dad into signing the paper so he could join the Navy. That was him. He was a junior, high school, and he finished high school in the Navy. And when he got out of that, he went to electrical school back east. And he was third in a class of 150. He came back to Coeur d'Alene, Bunker Hill Mine, and served his apprenticeship, and finally became electrical maintenance superintendent for the whole mine. But in the interim, when he was a journeyman electrician, he built houses. Guys would start a house and build it up to the square. And he'd take over and finish it, build the cabinets, plumb it, and wire it. He was making more money on the side than he was with the company. But when they asked him to be a company man, they said, we want your undivided attention. So he had to drop this other stuff. And first they pulled him in as a draftsman. And they said, well, we'll promote you if you'll get your college degree. He went to college one semester and he said, hey, that's not going to make me a better electrician. Either promote me or fire me. So they promoted him. Became superintendent, maintenance superintendent. Then he went to the company that owned Bunker Hill, had some mines down in Peru. Well, when they nationalized those mines, the Americans all had to leave. And some of the officials, they transferred them back up to Bunker Hill. Well, some of those guys, Bud said, they thought we Americans were still peons like they had down in Peru. But Bud quit, went down to Tucson. First he went to a underground mine north of Tucson. I can't remember the name of the town. And he became maintenance, mechanical maintenance superintendent there. Then he transferred to a company, Animax, in Tucson, and became both electrical and mechanical maintenance superintendent. And they had a big operation. When copper, it was an open pit mine, when copper price dropped, while they closed out, and he retired. And he's one of these guys who can do anything. He was a machinist. He's a good machinist. Had his own shop. Electrician. He's a carpenter. He can do it all. And Louis, when he was a sophomore in high school, he went down to work in the harvest down in Arlington, in this big farm, and he was a header puncher on the combine, had 2 combines, and the guy that was running the separator got drunk, and this guy that's owned the farm said, well, who am I going to get to run that machine? So he says, I can run it. So, sophomore in high school. And so that night he called Dad, got some pointers on how to set the machine, and he ran the. After the end of the season, why, this guy, Marion, whatever his last name was, went to Dad, and he says, hey, let me put that kid through high school. He says, you've got some other boys, let me just keep him and put him through high school, finance him. And when he finished high school, he married his high school sweetheart from Erie. And they back on the farm, and when the old man retired, Louis bought the leases and the machinery, and he farmed on his own for a year. And his son, Jim, had gone to college, was a computer nut, and with Boeing for 2 years, and he went to him and says, hey, come farm with me. Jim had married a city girl. He said, if your wife can make the transition, try it for a year, you work for me for a year, and if it works out, I'll make you a full partner. And she took the country living like a duck to water. And they worked that up to, they farmed 10,000 acres, 5,000 to 4,500 acres of wheat a year. Quite an operation. I asked Louis what it cost to operate. He said just shy of $1 million a year. This operation. There's chemicals and machinery and labor and taxes. And it's a big deal. And Louis, you know Annie. But that Jim's daughter, Michelle, she's a case. She, when she was in the 6th grade, she pitched hardball on the boys' 7th grade boys' baseball team. And they went to the state, and she was the only girl in the whole state contest. I don't know how they came out, but she's good. Where's that letter, Olah? And so, and then Iva worked for a co-op electrical company in Hermiston for years. She started as secretary and worked up as purchasing agent, and she retired from there. She had 3 boys. Bud had 5 kids. Les had 2. Louis had 2. And Violet had 1 girl. Ellen was Violet's daughter's name. She died here a couple years ago. She wound up as a pressman in a printing company in Seattle.
Iva lives in Oregon.
Mm-hmm. Now they moved to Dallas, down out from Salem.
What did you do during the war?
Worked on the farm up at Shelley. I worked in the shipyards and as a welder, and
This is Jim. This isn't Louis. This is Jim and his wife and her 2 kids.
Yeah, I met them.
Yeah.
how do you turn this thing off in the interim? But read that, what that girl does. She's in everything.
She is. I think it's the second paragraph tells everything she's in.
What a tomboy.
Have you been to all 50 states?
No, we haven't been to Florida. We haven't been to South Carolina. I think that's about the only one. You weren't with me when I went to North Carolina.
No, I wasn't.
But just those about 3 states that we haven't been in. We went back to, in 52, we went back as representatives of the Presbyterian Church to New York. Drove back. And we were in in New York City for 8 days. Took in some sights. I was a representative. I couldn't travel much. She got to see more of the city than I did. We were staying at a hotel at about 15 blocks from the church where the conference was being held, and we'd get on the bus to go down there every morning, and of course I'm always talking to people. And this old gal across the aisle from us, you ever see her there every morning, she wouldn't talk to me. And finally I says, "Why won't you talk to me?" She says, "Well, back here we just don't talk to strangers." I says, "I'm not a stranger." And I finally got her to loosen up and talk with me all the way to work.
Have you found much of a difference in the people in different regions?
No, not really. There's some of the prejudices that linger in the social life that creates a few barriers, but generally, talk to people, they'll respond. We had only one person in our school, 100 faculty. We had one black, and we recruited him. He was in drafting. Before the semester was over, the students were complaining. He says he doesn't know what he's talking about. And to find out, he'd falsified his papers. We had to let him go. And that was the only occasion that we had in the school. We had occasionally we'd get a student, an Indian student. We had a little trouble with those. One, a mining firm over in Wyoming they had a government contract and they needed something politically to a non-Caucasian employee. So this kid was in diesel and he was good mechanic. We sent him over there. In 6 weeks, WDIs, 2 DWIs, jumped bail, came back on the reservation. We could have killed him, we'd have caught him. But he finally went to work for a mining company up on the reservation. Did all right, did a good job, but he couldn't handle that being away from the kind. We had better luck with the females, Indians, than we did the males. There seemed to be if you were a successful Indian, then you were a white Indian. That attitude seemed to prevail. And we didn't have very good luck with males. And we tried. I never tried so hard to get people involved, but it just didn't work.
Grandma, you were saying that you wanted to get out of St. Anthony, but you didn't say why exactly.
I wanted to see what?
That you wanted to get out of St. Anthony?
Oh.
Why did you want to get out?
Because I was tired of listening to the LDS people.
What was it that bugged you so much?
Well, there was only just a small group of us that were Protestants, and so they had a lot of parties and things that we didn't have.
Oh, so you didn't get to go to their parties?
No. And at a certain age, the parties seemed to be very important to you. as you get older, it doesn't matter, you know, but when you're a teenager, it's you like to get in with the other people too on that. So, but I was determined I was going to be able to make my own money. But I had to have kind of an education before I could make my own money. And I knew that I had to get out of St. Anthony because most of the people there were the LDS people, and they'd hire their own people. They wouldn't hire the other people that weren't with the church on that. So, yeah. So that's why I finally got to come down here to Hotel and go to the university. Of course, it wasn't called university then, it was just a state school. On that, so.
Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, Latter-day Saints. They still think they're saints. Just talk to them. Yeah, it was, then Aunt Muriel lived down here too. That was fun. On that. So.
And you were members of the Presbyterian Church for a long, long time here.
Yeah, my mother was a Presbyterian. She came, and her father was Presbyterian. They came from Iowa. And this was strong Presbyterian.
That came from that's where we're now.
That's why my mother would not marry my dad until she left the LDS. He was an LDS person, raised that way until he left the church to join her church, the Presbyterian Church. She'd marry him.
So he left for love.
And his mother was madder than the dickens. So, to her, he was still an LDS person, see. In fact, I was about 7 or 8 years old before my grandmother even talked to me. She wouldn't recognize me at all. And in a small town, that's quite noticeable.
Yeah. So she lived in the same town, and she wouldn't talk to you?
No, because she was mad at my mother because my mother's the one that took her son away from the church.
Oh.
Yeah, they were very, very strong, very religious. I think they've opened up a little bit now, more than what they ever had. But, try to a point, realize that there are other people with other kinds of religion too, that's just as important as they were. Well, any place you want to go, you guys?
Nope.
Every place we think about is still closed, isn't it?
Well, it's a bit, we'll take a drive up here, see if we